Hey there folks, Wrel here. Today I thought we'd go over a brief guide for using Symmetra, the Queen of Lasers or the Queen of Light, in Overwatch. We'll break down her abilities, we'll talk about when you should and should not play her, as well as some tips and tricks to top it all off. First things first though is that Symmetra is classified as a support hero, but for all intents and purposes, she plays as a defensive builder. The only reason that you can argue she falls into the support category is because her E ability gives allied players a 25 health shield that acts just like a normal shield would, in that it recharges when you haven't taken damage for 3 seconds. You cannot reapply the shield to teammates after they've taken the damage because it just recharges on its own. You can, and have to, however, reapply it to heroes who have already died. Because of that, you want to keep a pretty close eye on who's coming back from the graveyard and apply shields accordingly. It's also worth noting that if Mercy revives players with her ult, the shield does not need to be reapplied. 25 shield health does not sound like a lot, and there are very few edge cases where it's going to make or break anything, one of which is that Mei will no longer be capable of dying instantly to a Hanzo headshot, but in more common situations it just gives players a surprising amount of survivability due to it being a shield that recharges on its own. When you do drop a layer of shield on top of an ally, you'll get that 25 heat for support, but only after the match has started. Symmetra's shift ability allows her to place up to 6 sentry turrets, but you can only hold 3 charges at a time, and they must recharge one by one. Because of the whole recharging bit, if you're playing defense on a map like Hanamura or Route 66, you want to pick your hero and immediately get out there and start prepping defenses. Between travel time and recharge speeds, you usually won't get 6 turrets down before the match starts, but that should be the goal. Sentry turrets have 1 health. They die instantly to anything and everything, so grouping them too closely is a bad idea. Putting them at eye level is a bad idea. Dropping one, hoping that it'll help you, is a bad idea too, though sometimes it can help as a minor distraction, but usually only during the chaotic moments. What you really want is for these turrets to come as much of a surprise to your enemies as you can manage. So you stack their fields of fire for increased damage, you keep them spread out enough that players can't deal with all of them in a single shot, and bonus points if you get an enemy to have to turn 180 degrees around to deal with the turrets. Sentry turrets deal 25 damage per second, and they seem to also slow players by about 10% movement speed per turret, and that stacks with each turret that's firing at your enemy. The number on the movement speed is definitely not exact, but that's the general feeling that comes from eyeballing it in training, and if you can lay a proper nest, you've got not only the damage from 6 turrets, but the movement speed slow that comes with it as well. Symmetra's PHOTON projector is a pretty neat weapon with a couple of different fire modes, though neither of which are capable of headshots. Your primary fire is going to latch onto a close range enemy, dealing damage that ramps up over time, while the secondary fire releases a piercing orb that does damage through barriers and through multiple players. PHOTON projector's primary fire has 3 stages of damage, and it effectively levels up each second that's spent on a target. At stage 1 you do 30 damage per second, at stage 2 you do 60 damage per second, and at stage 3 you do 120 damage per second. So there's a big ramp up there at the end, and if you lose line of sight of your target, you won't immediately lose that ramp up. In fact, it sticks around for a fair amount of time. So you can chain a kill after a kill after a kill if the enemy is not paying attention to you. Symmetra has a pretty small hitbox, she moves as quickly as most other characters, and the weapon latches on, so just getting into the mix and jumping around like crazy is a pretty good way to take out squishy targets that don't view you as an immediate threat. I would suggest that you stay away from armored targets though as much as possible, as armor reduces the damage output by about half just due to how the weapon works. PHOTON projector's secondary fire is a charge up that unleashes orbs of light that pierce through players and barriers. It deals anywhere from 25 to 125 damage based on how long you have it charged, and the weapon caps out at a 2-second charge, or when the circular crosshair overlaps itself. You can hold down the charge for up to 3 seconds, but it won't actually do any additional damage past 2. A fully charged orb looks big, but the collision on it is actually pretty small. Just keep that in mind when you're trying to swing it around corners. This is the ability that you want to constantly spam into choke points. The projectile speed is slow, the orb is super easy to see and avoid, but if your enemy has limited movement or if their vision is obscured because they're hiding behind their tanks, you can do loads of damage. It's worth noting that there is a minor area of effect when the orb impacts a wall or a floor, but it's small enough that you don't really want to rely on the splash actually hitting anyone. Symmetra's ultimate ability is her teleporter. Enemies usually know when it's placed due to automatic in-game callouts. It's easy to destroy, it only has 6 charges before it dies and you have to start recharging your ult again, but when you drop a teleporter, it'll place one at your location and one in the spawn room. You can walk through the connection that's in the spawn room and it'll dump you out at the teleporter you just placed. Also, players walking through the teleporter will come out facing the direction the arrows are pointed, so keep that in mind and place it appropriately. You can charge through the teleporter with Reinhardt and still be charging when you come out the other side. You can take a teleporter with Tracer and then recall back into the spawn room if you're quick enough, but you can't throw projectiles through or anything nasty like that. In quick play matches, you can be more aggressive with teleporter placement than you can in competitive, just because of how easy it is for a dedicated Genji to find and destroy it. So for competitive play, and even in quick play matches where people are actually paying attention, you want to place the teleporter where it'll be safe for those 6 charges. Generally, that means in a location that's too far out of the way for the enemy to want to look for it, but still giving your dead allies a shorter route to the objective. Bonus points if you give them a flank on that objective. If you save them any time at all, it's pretty much a win. If you happen to have some sentry turrets on hand, you can definitely use them to guard your teleporter, and it's a good idea, I definitely recommend it, but it's still not going to keep it as safe as you'd probably like. Overall, Symmetra is a really niche hero, and this puts her in kind of a weird position. Unlike most heroes where you can play them in a match until you figure out that they're just not working and then you switch off to something else, Symmetra is already about useless in half of the maps and game modes. Well, useless is a little bit harsh a term, but she definitely takes up a slot for other heroes who would be more productive. On any map where you're playing offense, which includes hybrid maps like Lijiang Towers or Nepal, do not play Symmetra. On maps where you're playing defense, but are on that last leg, you also don't want to play Symmetra. So that's stuff like B Point Hanamura, B Point Egypt, the last payload point for Hollywood, Kings Row, Route 66, basically anything. The reason for it is that Symmetra's teleporter becomes much less important because the distance is short enough that you're not really saving anyone time, and she doesn't have the offensive capabilities to push enemies back. Not only that, but her turrets are flimsy and they need to be grouped up to do anything significant. So essentially, if you play her at any of those times that aren't recommended, the most that you're getting out of the experience is the extra 25 shield health, which is to say not really worth it when you could be pulling another healer, another DPS, another defense, basically anything not Symmetra. She is a lot of fun, she can definitely be a game changer due to the teleporter placement, either through flanking enemies or just getting your dead allies back into the fight more quickly, but play her where it makes sense, or expect a lot of hate and losses if you don't. If this video has been interesting, helpful, or entertaining, please feel free to like, subscribe, tell your friends about the channel, and if you have any advice on using Symmetra, or if you'd like to see more Overwatch content in general, go ahead, leave those thoughts in the comment section down below. Thanks very much, folks. Wrel signing off.
Seconds remaining. Sentry deployed. Sentry turret placed. Teleporter online. 10 seconds.